If you're watching this, something inside you is shattered. Not metaphorically, not poetically, actually shattered. And the worst part? No one around you seems to understand why you can't just move on from someone who treated you terribly. They look at you with confusion, sometimes even judgment, as if your pain is excessive, irrational, or self-inflicted. But here's what they don't see. You're not grieving a person. You're grieving the loss of yourself. The version of you that believed love meant sacrifice. The version that thought if you just gave enough, cared enough, understood enough, they would finally see you. They would finally choose you. Carl Jung spent decades studying this psychological phenomenon, and what he discovered will change everything you thought you knew about why this hurts so much. He called it the breaking open, a necessary psychological dismemberment that happens when an empath loves someone incapable of loving them back. You see, most people experience heartbreak, but what you're experiencing isn't heartbreak, it's identity fracture. It's the complete collapse of the persona you built around making someone else whole. And Jung knew that this collapse, as devastating as it feels, isn't happening to you, it's happening for you. This video is about that moment, the turning point, the precise instant when the unbearable pain stops being your enemy and becomes your greatest teacher. Not because the pain goes away, it doesn't, not immediately, but because something shifts in your consciousness. A doorway opens that was previously invisible, and on the other side of that doorway is the person you were always meant to become. I need you to understand something crucial before we go further. If you're an empath who has loved someone emotionally unavailable, your nervous system has been living in a state of chronic activation for months, possibly years. Your body has been in survival mode, trying to earn love from someone whose nervous system is wired to reject intimacy. This isn't just emotional pain. This is physiological trauma. And here's the truth that no one tells you. The reason it hurts this much is because you weren't just in a relationship. You were in a therapeutic role. You were unconsciously trying to heal their childhood wounds while abandoning your own. You were pouring from an empty cup into a broken vessel, believing that if you just found the right angle, the right words, the right timing, the water would finally stay. But it never did, and it never will. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were trying to complete someone who hasn't decided to complete themselves. Jung understood that empaths are psychologically wired differently. You don't just feel your own emotions. You absorb the emotional frequency of everyone around you. And when you encounter someone emotionally shut down, someone defended, someone who learned to survive by not feeling, your empath system goes into overdrive. You sense their pain beneath their walls. You see their potential beneath their patterns. And you make a fatal mistake. You believe that your love can reach them. Pause for a moment. Think about the exact moment you realized your love couldn't reach them. Can you pinpoint it? Was it a specific conversation? A silence that lasted too long? Sometimes writing it down helps. If you feel moved to, share that moment in the comments. Not for me, but for yourself. And for the person reading it who needs to know they're not alone. This is your turning point. The moment you stop believing that your love can save anyone. The moment you realize that the person who needed saving all along was you. And the most profound truth Jung ever shared about this process is this: you had to break open, because you were never actually whole to begin with. You were performing wholeness while fundamentally abandoning yourself. The breaking open isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your real one. Let's go back to the beginning. Long before you met the person who broke you open, something happened in your childhood that programmed your nervous system for this exact pattern. Jung called this the original wound. The first moment you learned that your needs didn't matter as much as someone else's emotional state. Maybe you had a parent who was emotionally volatile, and you became the family thermometer, constantly monitoring their moods to keep the peace. Maybe you had a depressed parent, and you learned that your job was to make them smile, to be the light in their darkness. Or perhaps you had a narcissistic parent who loved you conditionally, only when you performed, achieved, or made them look good. Whatever the specific circumstances, you learned a devastating lesson. Love equals labor. Connection requires self-abandonment. Being valuable means being useful to someone else's emotional regulation. This is what Jung meant when he said that the child creates a false self to survive emotionally unsafe environments. You couldn't be authentically you. Messy, needy, imperfect, emotional. So you became the accommodator, the peacemaker, the emotional caretaker, the one who could feel everyone's pain except your own. And here's the cruel irony. This adaptation made you incredibly valuable to others. People loved having you around. You were understanding, compassionate, never demanding, always giving. But inside, a part of you was slowly starving. The part that needed to be seen. The part that wanted to be chosen without having to earn it. The part that longed to rest. Fast forward to adulthood. Your unconscious mind, in its infinite wisdom and its fundamental brokenness, seeks out exactly the kind of person who will recreate your original wound. Not because you're self-destructive, but because your psyche is trying to heal the past by mastering the present. Jung called this repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate unresolved childhood dynamics in adult relationships, hoping this time the outcome will be different. This time, if you love hard enough, give enough, understand enough, they'll finally see your worth. They'll finally choose you. And in choosing you, you'll retroactively heal the child who wasn't chosen. But here's what your psyche doesn't tell you. You can't heal a childhood wound through an adult relationship. You can only transfer the pain from one person to another until you finally face the original source, the emotionally unavailable person you fell in love with. They're not the problem, they're the messenger. They're showing you in the most painful way possible exactly how you've been treating yourself your entire life. Withholding, distant, conditional, giving breadcrumbs while you starve for nourishment. Think about it. How many times did you silence your own needs because you didn't want to be too much? How many times did you accept less than you deserved because you didn't want to lose them? How many times did you betray yourself, your intuition, your boundaries, your self-respect, just to keep them close? You became to yourself exactly what they were to you, emotionally unavailable. This is the empath's original wound made visible. And the person who triggered this awareness isn't your enemy. They're your mirror. A painful, devastating, necessary mirror that shows you how you've been abandoning yourself since childhood. Jung believed that we don't attract what we want. We attract what we are, or more accurately, what we believe we deserve based on our earliest attachment experiences. You didn't choose an emotionally unavailable person by accident. You chose them because some part of you, the wounded child part, recognized them, felt safe with them, because unavailable was familiar, unavailable was home, and now you're at the turning point, the moment you can finally see the pattern, not to shame yourself, but to free yourself. Here's a truth that might be hard to hear. You became addicted to them, not to who they actually were, but to the intermittent reinforcement of their attention. And intermittent reinforcement is the most powerful form of psychological conditioning that exists. Jung studied this phenomenon extensively. He observed that humans don't become most attached to consistent love. We become most attached to inconsistent love. Because inconsistent love activates our survival brain. It turns relationship into a puzzle we must solve, a code we must crack, a game we must win. When someone is emotionally available and consistent, your nervous system can relax. There's no mystery, no chase, no need to prove your worth. But when someone is hot and cold, present and absent, loving and withdrawn, your nervous system goes into hyperdrive. Every small gesture of affection becomes a dopamine hit. Every withdrawal becomes a crisis that must be solved. This is why you couldn't let go. Not because the relationship was good, but because it was addictive. Think about the last time they reached out after days or weeks of silence. Remember that rush of relief? That flood of hope? That feeling of maybe this time will be different? That wasn't love. That was your brain releasing a cascade of dopamine, the same neurochemical involved in gambling, cocaine use, and any other addictive behavior. And just like any addiction, you needed increasingly intense hits to feel the same high. So you accepted less. You tolerated more. You bent yourself into smaller and smaller shapes, hoping that your flexibility would finally make you fit into their rigid, defended heart. If you're sitting here thinking, this is exactly what happened to me, I want you to know something. You're not weak. You're not pathetic. You're not too sensitive. Your nervous system was doing exactly what it was designed to do in the face of intermittent reinforcement. If you need to hear that today, drop a projection in the comments. Not for me to see, for you to claim. But here's what the addiction was really about. You weren't addicted to them. You were addicted to the moment they would finally see you, finally choose you, finally love you the way you loved them. You were addicted to the fantasy of your own worthiness being confirmed by the person least capable of confirming it. Jung called this projection. the psychological process of putting our own rejected qualities onto another person. But with empaths, projection works differently. You didn't project your darkness onto them. You projected your light, your potential, your capacity for transformation. You saw in them everything they could become, and you fell in love with that vision. The problem? They didn't ask you to see that. They didn't want to become that. And they certainly weren't going to change just because you could envision their potential. So you stayed, month after month, year after year, accepting breadcrumbs and calling it love, accepting inconsistency and calling it passion, accepting emotional unavailability and calling it complicated or deep or worth fighting for. But breadcrumbs aren't sustenance. They're starvation in slow motion. And every time you accepted a breadcrumb, you were training your nervous system that this is what you deserve. This is what love looks like. This is the best you can hope for. The turning point comes when you realize something devastating and liberating at the same time. The breadcrumbs weren't coming from them. They were coming from you. You were the one giving yourself breadcrumbs of self-respect, self-love, self-worth. You were the one withholding the full feast of your own presence, your own enoughness, your own inherent value. They just mirrored back to you what you were already doing to yourself. And here's the most painful part of the turning point. You have to grieve, not just the loss of them, but the loss of who you were when you believed breadcrumbs were enough. You have to mourn the years you spent waiting, the self-betrayals you committed, the boundaries you crossed, the voice inside you that you silenced again and again. This grief is necessary. Jung called it the descent, the journey into the underworld of your own psyche, where you must face everything you've been avoiding. And for empaths, what you've been avoiding isn't darkness. It's your own light, your own worthiness, your own needs. The addiction to breadcrumbs ends when you finally remember what a full meal tastes like. There's a phase in this process that Jung warned about, and if you're in it right now, I need you to know, this is the most dangerous and most sacred part of your journey. He called it the dark night of the soul, the period after the relationship ends where you feel completely untethered from reality, from meaning, from yourself. This isn't regular sadness. This isn't normal grief. This is existential despair. The kind where you wake up and for a few seconds you forget, and then you remember, and the weight of that remembering feels like it might actually kill you. The kind where you can't eat, can't sleep, can't focus on anything except the endless loop of questions. Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? Will I ever feel normal again? If you're in this place right now, please hear me. You are not broken. You are breaking open. And there is a profound difference. Jung observed that the dark night of the soul happens when the ego, your constructed sense of self, can no longer maintain its illusions. For years, maybe decades, you built your identity around being the person who could love anyone into wholeness, the person who never gave up, the person who could fix, heal, transform through the sheer force of your compassion. And then you met someone who couldn't be fixed, wouldn't be healed, refused to transform, and your entire identity collapsed. This is why it hurts so much more than a regular breakup. You didn't just lose a person. You lost your purpose, your role, your reason for being. Without someone to save, who are you? Without someone to pour into, what's your value? Without someone to understand, what's your gift? The dark night of the soul is your psyche's way of forcing you to answer these questions. And the only way through is to sit in the not knowing, to resist the urge to immediately find another project, another person, another purpose outside yourself. Jung said that in the dark night, you must hold the tension of the opposites, the paradox of being completely shattered while somehow still being whole, the impossibility of feeling like you're dying while continuing to live, the contradiction of knowing intellectually that you'll heal while emotionally believing you never will. This is the turning point within the turning point, because something happens in the absolute depths of despair that can't happen anywhere else. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop trying to be okay when you're not okay. And in that raw, undefended state, you finally meet yourself. Not the false self you created to survive. Not the adaptive self that learned to monitor everyone else's emotions. But your true self. The self that exists beneath all the conditioning, all the patterns, all the wounds. The self that has been waiting, patient and quiet, for you to finally stop running. Many people in the comments of that first video said they felt like they were dying during this phase. And Jung would say, yes, you are. The version of you that needed external validation to feel worthy is dying. The version of you that believed love required self-abandonment is dying. The version of you that thought you could earn belonging by being useful is dying. And death is terrifying, even when it's the death of something that was killing you. But here's what happens in the dark night that makes it sacred. You discover that you can survive your own despair. You learn that you won't actually die from feeling your feelings. You realize that the pain, as intense as it is, isn't permanent. It comes in waves. And between the waves there are moments, small at first but growing, where you remember who you were before all of this. Or more accurately, you discover who you've always been underneath. I know some of you are in this space right now and you're looking for anything. Any tool, any framework, any way to make sense of this. I put together something that maps the stages of this process, including what to expect in the dark night and how to know when you're moving through it rather than stuck in it. The link is in the first pinned comment. But I want to be clear, no ebook can take away the pain. It can only help you understand it. And sometimes understanding is the difference between drowning and treading water. The dark night of the soul isn't the end, it's the labor. And what's being born is you. There's a stage that comes after the despair. And if you haven't reached it yet, you will. Jung called it the integration of the shadow, but I'm going to call it what it actually feels like. Sacred rage. This is the moment when sadness transforms into anger, when grief becomes fury, when you finally stop blaming yourself and start seeing clearly what actually happened. You weren't loved. You were used. You weren't cherished. You were convenient. You weren't seen. You were tolerated. And something inside you that has been silent for so long suddenly roars. This rage is terrifying for empaths because you've spent your entire life managing other people's emotions. You've been the calm one, the understanding one, the one who sees everyone's perspective, who makes excuses for bad behavior, who gives endless chances. Anger doesn't fit your self-concept. Anger feels dangerous, selfish, wrong. But Jung understood that without integrating your shadow, the parts of yourself you've deemed unacceptable, you can never become whole. And for empaths, the most rejected part of your shadow is your anger, your boundaries, your capacity to say no and mean it, your willingness to prioritize yourself even when others are disappointed. The sacred rage is your psyche's way of reclaiming these lost parts of yourself. Think about all the times you swallowed your anger to keep the peace, all the times you felt disrespected, dismissed, devalued, and you said nothing because you didn't want to be difficult or dramatic or too much. All the times you convinced yourself that understanding their behavior was the same as accepting it. The rage you're feeling now? It's all of those moments demanding to be witnessed. All of those self-betrayals demanding to be acknowledged. All of those boundaries you didn't set demanding to finally be honored. And here's what makes this rage sacred rather than destructive. It's not about them anymore. It's about you. It's about the part of you that finally values yourself enough to be angry that you weren't valued. It's about the part of you that finally loves yourself enough to be furious that you weren't loved. This is the turning point where you stop being a victim and become a warrior. Not a warrior against them. They're irrelevant now. A warrior for yourself, for your worth, for your right to be chosen, seen, valued, loved in the way you deserve. Jung believed that anger is information. It tells you where your boundaries were violated, where your needs weren't met, where you abandoned yourself to accommodate someone else. And for empaths who have spent a lifetime bypassing anger in favor of understanding, this information is revolutionary. You start to see the relationship clearly for the first time, not through the fantasy of who they could become, not through the lens of their childhood wounds or their trauma or their complicated emotional unavailability, but through the simple, factual truth of their actions. They showed you who they were, again and again and again. And you spent months or years convincing yourself you were seeing it wrong, understanding it wrong, interpreting it wrong. You gaslit yourself because accepting the truth would mean accepting that you gave your love to someone incapable of receiving it. The sacred rage says, never again. Never again will you silence your intuition to maintain a connection. Never again will you accept inconsistency and call it love. Never again will you betray yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Never again will you settle for breadcrumbs when you are the entire feast. But here's the crucial part that Jung emphasized. The rage must be felt, witnessed, honored, but not acted on impulsively. This isn't about revenge. It's not about showing them or making them pay or proving your worth by demonstrating how well you're doing without them. The sacred rage is for your internal transformation, not external validation. It's the fuel that powers your boundary setting, the energy that rebuilds your self-respect, the fire that burns away everything that isn't authentically you. Feel it. Let it move through you. Let it teach you. And then let it refine you into someone who will never accept less than they deserve again. After the dark night, after the sacred rage, comes the most disorienting part of this entire journey: reconstruction. This is where you realize that breaking open wasn't the hardest part. Rebuilding is. Because now you have to answer the question, who am I without this pattern? Who am I when I'm not pouring myself into someone else? Who am I when I'm not proving my worth through my capacity to understand, accommodate, and endure? Jung called this process individualization, the journey of becoming who you actually are rather than who you've been conditioned to be. And for empaths, this is terrifying, because your entire identity has been built around your relationships with others. You know who you are in relation to someone else's needs, but who are you in relation to yourself? This is the turning point where you must do something you've never done before. Choose yourself, not once, not in a dramatic moment of clarity, but every single day, in small, unglamorous ways that no one else will witness or celebrate. Choosing yourself looks like this: not checking their social media even though your fingers ache to know what they're doing, who they're with, whether they miss you. Not responding when they reach out after weeks of silence with a casual, "Hey," as if they didn't devastate you. Not making yourself smaller, quieter, easier so that someone else feels comfortable. It looks like sitting with the discomfort of being alone without immediately trying to fill the void with another person, another project, another distraction. It looks like learning to tolerate boredom, silence, stillness, all the things you've been running from your entire life. Jung understood that empaths avoid being alone because being alone means feeling everything you've been absorbing from everyone else. Your nervous system is so used to processing other people's emotions that when you're alone, you don't know what's yours and what's theirs. It all feels overwhelming, chaotic, too much. But reconstruction requires you to sit in that chaos until your system recalibrates. Until you learn to distinguish between your emotions and the emotional residue you've been carrying from every person you've tried to save. Here's what starts to happen. You begin to notice that you have preferences, opinions, desires that have nothing to do with anyone else. Maybe you realize you actually don't like the music you've been listening to. You liked it because they did. Maybe you discover you've been living in a way that prioritizes others' comfort over your own joy. Maybe you start to remember dreams you had before you made someone else's potential your purpose. This is the reconstruction, layer by layer, choice by choice, boundary by boundary. And it's not linear. Some days you'll feel powerful, clear, certain that you're healing. Other days you'll wake up and the grief will be as fresh as the day they left. You'll be tempted to reach out, tempted to accept less, tempted to fall back into the familiar pattern because at least in the pattern you knew who you were. Jung warned about this. He said the psyche resists change even when change is liberating, because the known, even when painful, feels safer than the unknown. Your nervous system will try to pull you back to what's familiar. This is why people return to toxic relationships again and again. Not because they're weak, but because their system is trying to return to homeostasis, even when homeostasis is dysfunctional. The reconstruction requires you to override this impulse, to stay present even when presence is uncomfortable, to keep choosing yourself even when choosing yourself feels selfish, foreign, wrong. You start to rebuild your life with new materials, not the performance of worthiness, not the accommodation of others, but the foundation of self-respect, self-trust, self-love that isn't dependent on external validation. You learn to set boundaries without guilt, to say no without explanation, to prioritize your peace over others' opinions, to recognize red flags immediately instead of making excuses for them. And slowly, so slowly you almost don't notice, you start to feel like yourself again. Or more accurately, you start to feel like yourself for the first time. Now we arrive at what Jung considered the ultimate goal of psychological development: integration. Not healing that erases the past, not closure that ties everything into a neat bow, but integration, the ability to hold your entire story, including the painful parts, as essential to who you've become. This is where the turning point becomes permanent transformation. Integration means you can think about them without your nervous system going into crisis mode. You can remember the good moments without immediately needing to return to them. You can acknowledge that you love them deeply while also acknowledging that they couldn't love you back. And both of these truths can exist simultaneously without destroying you. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites, and it's the mark of psychological maturity. Children live in black and white, all good or all bad. But mature adults can hold complexity. They were good in some ways and harmful in others. I loved them, and they hurt me. The relationship was real, and it was also doomed. I gave too much, and I also learned invaluable lessons about myself. For months, maybe years, you couldn't hold this complexity. You swung between extremes, idealizing them, then demonizing them, blaming yourself, then blaming them, believing you'll never love again, then desperately seeking the next person to fill the void. But integration brings you to the center, to the place where you can look at the entire experience with clear eyes and an open heart and say, this happened, it devastated me, and it also set me free. If you've reached integration, I have a question for you. What's the one thing you learned about yourself through this that you never would have discovered otherwise? Not what you learned about relationships or red flags, but about you, your essence, your truth. Would you share it? Because your wisdom might be exactly what someone earlier in the journey needs to hear. Here's what integration looks like in practice. You stop telling the story of what happened as if you're still trying to make sense of it. You're no longer searching for closure from them because you've created closure within yourself. You no longer need them to acknowledge how they hurt you because you've acknowledged it yourself. You no longer need them to validate that you are worth loving because you finally know you are. Integration is also where you begin to see the gifts hidden in the devastation. And I know how this sounds. When you're in the dark night of the soul, the last thing you want to hear is that your suffering has purpose. But Jung observed something profound. The wound is where the light enters. Everything you learned about yourself through this impossible love becomes the foundation of your wisdom. The boundaries you finally set become your new standards. The self-respect you cultivated becomes your new baseline. The awareness you gained about your patterns becomes your protection against repeating them. You realize that you needed this person to break you open because you were never going to do it yourself. You were too committed to being fine, to being strong, to being the one who helps others. It took someone incapable of loving you to force you to finally love yourself. And here's the paradox. You wouldn't choose this pain again, but you also wouldn't undo it. Because on the other side of this breaking open is a version of you that you actually like. A version that doesn't perform, doesn't abandon herself, doesn't accept less than she deserves. Integration doesn't mean you're grateful for the pain. It means you're grateful for who you became because of it. Jung believed that the psyche is always moving toward wholeness, even when the path is brutal. And for empaths, the path to wholeness requires the shattering of the false self you created to survive. The self that believed your value came from your usefulness. The self that thought love meant sacrifice. The self that made everyone else's emotional well-being more important than your own. That self had to die, and something truer had to be born. This is integration, not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning, not the erasure of what happened, but the integration of it into a larger story of becoming. You are no longer the person who entered that relationship. You are no longer the person who was destroyed by that relationship. You are someone entirely new, someone whole, someone sovereign, someone free. And now, finally, we arrive at what happens after the turning point, after the breaking open, after the dark night, the sacred rage, the reconstruction, and the integration. We arrive at the return. Jung wrote extensively about the hero's journey, the descent into the underworld followed by the return to the ordinary world, transformed. But the return is the part no one talks about, because the return is where you discover the most challenging truth of all. You can't go back to who you were, and the world you return to looks exactly the same, even though you're completely different. Your family still has the same dynamics. Your friends still have the same patterns. The world still glorifies self-sacrifice and calls it love. But you're awake now, and you can't unsee what you've seen. This is where many empaths struggle, because you've done the work, you've healed the wound, you've set the boundaries, you've learned to choose yourself. But now you're back in the world and you're wondering, Can I love again? Can I trust again? Or have I become so boundaried, so self-protected, so aware of red flags that I've lost my ability to be vulnerable? Here's what Jung discovered. The return isn't about becoming less empathic. It's about becoming sovereignly empathic. You don't lose your gift. You refine it. You learn to feel others without absorbing them, to understand others without fixing them, to love others without abandoning yourself. This is loving from wholeness rather than woundedness, and it changes everything. When you loved from woundedness, you were drawn to people who needed you. Your worth was tied to their transformation. You stayed in relationships that hurt you because leaving would mean admitting you couldn't save them, and admitting you couldn't save them would mean you had no value. But when you love from wholeness, you're drawn to people who see you, not your potential, not your usefulness, but you. In your complexity, your mess, your humanness, you're drawn to people who are doing their own work, healing their own wounds, taking responsibility for their own emotional regulation. And this feels different. It might even feel boring at first after years of intensity and drama and emotional roller coasters. Because healthy love is steady, consistent, safe. There's no push-pull, no hot and cold, no breadcrumbs followed by feasts followed by famine. Just presence, just availability, just mutual respect and reciprocity. Your nervous system might not recognize this as love at first, because your system was trained to associate love with anxiety, uncertainty, and the constant need to earn approval. But this is the work of the return, retraining your nervous system to accept stable love, to trust consistency, to believe that you deserve to be chosen without having to prove your worth every single day. Jung said that the ultimate goal of psychological development is to become who you actually are, not who you were conditioned to be, not who others need you to be, but your authentic self. And your authentic self isn't the empath who saves everyone. It's the sovereign empath who knows that the most powerful thing you can do for others is refuse to save them, so they're forced to save themselves. This is the wisdom you return with. This is the gift hidden in the devastation. You learned that you are not responsible for other people's healing. You learned that your love, as powerful as it is, cannot transform someone who isn't ready. You learned that the only person you can save is yourself, and in saving yourself, you became the person you needed all along. The turning point isn't a single moment. It's a series of choices. The choice to stop accepting breadcrumbs. The choice to sit in the dark night instead of running from it. The choice to feel the sacred rage instead of suppressing it. The choice to reconstruct your life around your own values instead of others' expectations. The choice to integrate your story instead of being haunted by it. And finally, the choice to return to the world as someone who loves from wholeness. If you feel like you're ready to start mapping your own journey through these stages, not to rush the process but to have a companion for it, I created something based on everything we've explored together in this community. It's a Jungian guide that walks you through the patterns, the wounds, and the reconstruction. You'll find it in the pinned comment if it feels right for where you are today. You're not broken. You never were. You were breaking open. And what emerged from that breaking is the most authentic version of yourself you've ever been. This is your turning point. Welcome home.